Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to do a video sharing some of my recent science fiction and fantasy reads. I have a good variety here, including a couple books that I feel like are underhyped on BookTube. All that being said, let's get started. Now first, let's talk science fiction. I read a book called Lockstep by Karl Schroeder. This is about a teenage boy who is tasked by his family to go and make a claim on a planet on the far reaches of our solar system. For this journey, he goes into cryogenic sleep and something goes wrong, and the story starts with him waking up, realizing that he has slept for 14,000 years. Now he has to reintegrate with society and basically catch up on what humanity has been up to in the meantime. Now, one of the biggest concepts that is explored in this book is the idea of lockstep, as the title suggests, and that is where humans go into hibernation for 30 years and then are only awake for a month. And there are reasons for this. It has to do with travel as well as not overusing resources on planets. And this is a major part of the plot. And so the character gets to learn how this technology and concept of living works. And like I said, integrate into society. There's more going on, and you do get to find out some things about his family, and I don't want to spoil too much of the actual plot. What I liked so much about this book was the concept of lockstep. I like the fact that Karl Schroeder took this idea and really explored the different ways that this would affect every aspect of our life, from culture to travel and just the ways that humanity would adapt, and just kind of answered my question of why on earth would we even try to do something like that. So I found those parts fascinating. I've mentioned before that I've started really enjoying more hard science fiction, and this one is definitely that. I don't think it's the most complicated story, or rather he takes the time to explain the concepts in a very digestible way so that someone like myself that doesn't have a college education in science is able to understand what's going on. I didn't get completely attached to the story at all times. I found that the story kind of picked up and then slowed down, and it's very much more a book about the idea first, and then the plot almost came second. And while I enjoyed this book, I just didn't love the characters. So I don't think it was a perfect book, but still fascinating. I'm absolutely glad that I read it, and I'm very interested in reading more by Karl Schroeder. If you have recommendations, what else I should read by him, I'd love to know. This one was very good to check out. I do think it's underhyped. I heard about it because Rachel from Kalandi did a video talking about books that are underrated in science fiction. If you are looking for other booktubers that read science fiction, I highly recommend her channel. She is my go-to for all things sci-fi, and I will definitely link her channel down below. But if you're looking for a just really cool concept, something that is a little bit different in science fiction and a book that people aren't talking about constantly online, this is a good one to check out. Next, I read a short story collection, which is something I don't tend to read a lot of when it comes to science fiction, but it's quite a popular one, and that is Stories of Your Life and Others by Chiang. This, of course, is the collection that has the story that inspired the movie Arrival. I have already watched the movie Arrival before reading this, and I absolutely love it. It's definitely one of my favorite newer science fiction movies. And so I was very excited to see the source material, and I read that story first and absolutely loved it. It is very close to the movie. I was surprised how closely the adaptation was, and I just thought the original story was just beautiful. It's definitely complicated and deep, and it's just that great balance between story and concept. And the general story idea behind it is that aliens have arrived on Earth. We don't know how to communicate with them, and so a woman who is a professional linguistic is tasked with trying to communicate with the aliens. And then within that story, you also have the story of her having a child and that relationship going on throughout the book. And I don't want to say more than that. It's definitely one that if you don't know what happens in the story, if you don't know what it's all about, you don't want to have it spoiled. But trust me, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. I definitely also recommend the movie. I really enjoyed it, as I said. But the rest of the collection I did not enjoy. So the collection is all themed around linguistics, mathematics, and other things that the author has a background in. And I'll say that I like the hard science and linguistics that was tied into there. There were stories where I thought the formulas and the mathematical concepts that were discussed were absolutely fascinating. I honestly didn't totally understand all of the language and math that was in these stories, but I really enjoyed hearing about them, even if I only got maybe 50 to 70% of what they were saying. But the stories, the characters, the actual plots, I didn't find interesting. So I struggled with these stories so much. So I absolutely loved the story called The Story of Your Life, which again became Arrival, and would have given that story alone 5 stars, but the rest of the collection was just so dull. So I struggled to review and rate this collection as a whole, as I often do with short story collections. So I almost say try it for yourself. If you're a fan of the movie Arrival, I think it's well worth reading the original story. It was brilliant, but I didn't love the rest. I don't think I'm going to continue on and read any other of Ted Chiang's collections just because this one didn't really work for me. Cool concepts, but fell really flat, unfortunately. So that was kind of a bummer. Now, switching over to fantasy, I also read Blood Song by Anthony Ryan. This is a story of a young boy that is dropped off at a religious military school by his father, and he's basically told to go join this religious order and do what they tell him to do. And within this order, he is forced to learn how to fight and survive, and it's an incredibly brutal training school. And this story is a bit of a coming of age story. You follow the character from when I believe he's about 8 years old all the way up to his 20s, and you get to see how he grows, the relationships he forms with the other boys in this school. And I'll say that I really like the beginning of this. I've said before that I'm a huge fan of school settings in fantasy books. There isn't really magic in this world, but I still really liked the training montages, getting to learn the different fighting styles and hearing about their days and how they were forced through these different processes and training tactics and tests and all of that. It's something that really appeals to me. So I loved probably the first like 200 pages of that. And then the story moves on to a larger story because of course it's not about that, but really about a larger story within this fantasy world. And that's where I started to lose interest. I feel like this is more of a personal complaint that I get so attached to these school settings that when they are over and the story moves on to the real story, I just want to stay in the school setting a little longer. I've run into this with other books before. So if that's not something that you mind, if you're someone that enjoys a school setting, but then is okay moving on and doesn't get overly attached, you might enjoy this one a little bit more than me. I don't think the rest of the story was bad, but it just felt like a very average classic fantasy story, which again, if that's what you're looking for, great. But while I read and enjoy fantasy, I do tend to look for books that are a little bit more original and just something that kind of goes outside of the box. So I'd say this was a good average classic one that other people will probably enjoy a little bit more than me, depending on your taste in fantasy. But I'm glad I read it, and I don't think I'm going to continue on with the series because again, there isn't going to be more school settings in the later books, so it's probably not going to be for me. And the last book I want to talk about is The Vagrant by Peter Newman. This is a really unique concept. This is set in this almost post-apocalyptic world where there is this man that does not speak, that is traveling through these lands called the Blast Lands with a young infant child under his cloak. And you basically are trying to find out where he's going, what is happening, who is this child, and what is his purpose. And the premise alone, the beginning, completely intrigued me. This man is mysterious, and despite never saying a word on the page, you get to know him quite well, and the story definitely is intriguing. I'll say that this book is a very, very slow burn, and at the beginning of the story, I did not mind that. I was there for the first, like again, couple hundred pages of just going along, figuring out what was going on. And while I enjoyed those aspects of the book, eventually I started to want more. I wanted more answers, and I liked the main character. I thought he was intriguing, but for this silent man, I kind of wanted him to be cooler than he ended up being and just more of a badass character, if I'm honest. And he just wasn't the most fleshed out. Like, I was impressed how much we got from him without speaking, but I still wanted more. And by the end of the book, you still don't know that much about him, that much about his story. You do get flashbacks to kind of get an idea of what happened in the larger world, but This is the beginning of a trilogy, so I imagine you get more in the later books, but the first book, it didn't do enough to get me intrigued enough to want to continue. That being said, there's still really good reasons to check out this book. Like I said, it's a really cool concept. It's very different, which again is something that I look for in fantasy. I like fantasy books that aren't so classic, and this one is definitely not that. If you don't mind a slower burn, and if you're someone that loves atmosphere and a really dreary, bleak setting, then this one might be one you'll want to check out. I heard about this book from Kaitlin from Kitty G, which is definitely one of my go-to booktubers when it comes to fantasy. I'll link her channel down below. And if you somehow are not subscribed or don't know about her channel, please go check her out. I adore her content and always get the best recommendations from her. And again, while this wasn't a perfect read for me, I still want to recommend it because I do think that other people are going to love it. So if that premise sounds up your alley or it's just intriguing, go ahead, check it out for yourself and let me know what you think of it once you've read it. So that is it for this round of science fiction and fantasy reads. As always, I'd love to know if I've intrigued you to pick up any of these books. While they weren't perfect books for me, I really do believe that every book I mentioned here has an audience and people that will love it and give these books 5 stars. If you've already read them, please share your opinions down below, whether you loved them or hated them or anywhere in between. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I will talk to you again soon in another video. Okay, bye-bye.